Ronald the Rules Lawyer, and today I'm going to be covering the 3 revised martial classes that appear in the Pathfinder 2e player core book that comes out November 15. I first thought there would not be a lot of changes, but when I dug deep and compared a lot of the feats with each other, I found that there were quite a bit of changes, particularly for the rogue. Also, there's been a perception that the fighter is the best martial class in the game. They have the best accuracy with all weapons, and so hit the most often and crit the most often. Many Pathfinder players would say that reputation's overblown. It can at least be said that playing a fighter well is perhaps more straightforward than the other martial classes. So I've had this running theory that in the remaster they would buff the other martial classes and not the fighter. So we'll test that theory when we go through the classes. The designers also said that they had the goal of making crossbows more attractive as an option, as opposed to the classic longbows and shortbows. We'll see if they succeeded. I am Ronald the Rules Lawyer. I am a lawyer who has been game mastering tabletop role-playing games for the last 13 years. Most of those years I also ran a after-school, middle-school tabletop role-playing game class. My preferred system is Pathfinder 2e. Today's video is part of my ongoing coverage of the remaster before the street date November 15. If you want to be notified about the upcoming videos, like, subscribe, and ring the bell and you'll get a notification. Also support my Patreon. You'll get early access to these videos as quickly as I can put them up on the Patreon at least. I am trying to get all the videos public before November 15th after all. But also you get exclusive access to videos, including my 3.5-hour recording of me going through the player core and GM core book with people from my Discord server. So let's get into it. These are the 3 martial classes that will be in Player Core 1. Player Core 2 will have the remaining martial classes next summer. If you want to play those classes, which include the Barbarian, the Monk, the Investigator, the Swashbuckler, and the Champion, you already can find them on Archives of Nethys, which is the website that has all of Pathfinder 2e's rules for free. In this video, I'm going to first go through the rules changes that affect all martial classes, including the changes to the athletics skill. Then I go through the 3 classes, Fighter, Ranger, and Rogue, and use my usual approach with this series. Because there are new players coming to Pathfinder for the first time because of the remaster, I give a brief overview of each class before I go over the changes. And then a closing statement where I deal with my initial questions. Did they have a goal of buffing the non-fighter classes? And also, did they succeed at making crossbows comparable to longbows and shortbows? So first, the rules changes that affect every martial. First, the athletic skill, which is what you use to grapple, shove, trip, disarm, and reposition enemies, has gotten a bit of a buff because all those actions require a free hand. And when you use that free hand, your fist's agile trait applies. So if you have the multiple attack penalty, it is now reduced on those athletics checks. Also, we have a new athletic skill action called Reposition that lets you move a creature within your reach to another space within your reach. This gives you more flexibility. The shove action before was limited to pushing creatures farther away from you, so this is a nice option. Also, Disarm got an important buff. It was the skill action that many did not use because it didn't really have much of an effect on a regular success. You still need a critical success to actually knock the item out of their hand. But now, a success gives it an attack penalty and makes further disarm checks more likely, and those effects do not expire now. The creature needs to use an interact action to restore their grip to the item. So more toys for martials to play with just from their athletic skill alone. Another important quality of life change is that you can now swap one item that you hold with another item on your person. With the single action, you get to put one item away and draw one that you're wearing using the same hand. Very useful if you're switching between weapon loadouts. Go from your melee weapon to your ranged weapon and vice versa, for example. Also, the open trait, which was a trait for many of these classes' feats and restricted when you could use them, it's now been removed from the game entirely. The trait hardly ever came up in play, and people often forgot about it, and it doesn't seem very overpowered to remove it from the feats that it came up in. A nice simplification, streamlining that is welcome. Next is a small thing, but for those players whose player concept this affects, it's a big deal. The Ghost Touch rune, this is the current version of it. This is the one that lets you treat incorporeal creatures as if they were corporeal. Currently can only be applied to melee weapons. However, in the remaster, It can be applied to any weapon, including ranged weapons, and for rangers with a precision edge who do precision damage, and for rogues who do sneak attack precision damage, this will allow them to not lose their main feature against a whole class of enemies. So I thought that was worth mentioning. So the first class we'll cover is the fighter. You may be interested in my deep dive into the fighter, a 4-part series that I did earlier on my channel, where I also had a combat demonstration showing 5 very different first-level human fighters. For new players, here are the basics of the fighter. They are the most accurate with weapons. Every other martial class is trained in simple and martial weapons, while you are expert in simple and martial weapons and unarmed attacks, and you are trained in advanced weapons. Being expert means you get a +2 to accuracy to your strikes, which also makes it more likely you'll critically hit creatures because of the way critical hits work. Also at level 1, you get the reactive strike reaction, formerly called Attack of Opportunity. A very powerful feature. All characters and monsters by default in Pathfinder do not have opportunity attacks. The fighter does at level 1, and it triggers on many more things. Doing any move action, including standing up, leaving a square, doing any manipulate action like drawing a weapon or casting many spells, any ranged attack, all of these will provoke a free strike from the fighter. Fighters also start with the shield block reaction, which gives you another reaction that lets you soak damage with your raised shield. Fighters get a class feat at level 1, like all martials, and another class feat at every even-numbered level after. Fighters do not have subclasses in Pathfinder. You customize your fighter with feats. You basically build a fighting style with feats, and you can mix and match. If you're coming from D&D 5e, class feats are like Warlock invocations. And the fighter has a lot of feats, 92 feats by my count. Thankfully for new players, the book has 3 sample builds. Here is the Bully build, with suggested weapons, attributes, skills, and feats. As you level up as a fighter, you become more resistant to fear, you get a bonus to your initiative, and every morning you're able to prepare a feat as part of your daily preparations. And when you level up higher, you get to prepare 2 feats in the morning. And these can change every day. So what's new in the remaster? The remaster takes all the feats from the current core rulebook and the advanced player's guide and brings them together for each class that appears here. Almost all of them. There's a couple exceptions that I'll mention. As I said earlier, the open trait has been eliminated, so sudden charge is something you can do after you attack an enemy. But we also get some new feats, as we'll see. We get a new feat called Blade Break. When someone tries to force you to move somewhere, you get to prevent that from happening with a reaction by jamming your weapon into the ground or a wall. If they will move you 20 feet or more, you move only 5 feet. Very thematic and cool. Next is Lightning Swap. With a single action, you get to put away any number of items in your hands and draw 2 weapons or a shield and a weapon. In light of the new swap action, this is like super swap. So a fighter with a sword and a shield facing a flying dragon can, with a single action, take out 2 guns. We get another new feat called Sleek Reposition that plays with the new reposition action. Basically, it's a press action, so you have to have the multiple attack penalty when you use it. But it's a way to do a twofer. You hit them and can reposition them. And if you don't hit, they still are off guard for the rest of your turn. This is similar to and seems to be a spiritual successor of Dragging Strike from the current core rulebook. That was purely about pulling, and you could also walk backward while doing so. Admittedly, that was very situational. I don't know about that coming up very often. This feat, though, is still legal in Pathfinder Society organized play, because it hasn't been replaced by something of the same name. Note that this new feat requires a finesse weapon or a polearm. Next is a change to a current feat, Powerful Shove. This is the one that buffed some lower level feats that let you bully people around more. Now it triggers not simply when you shove a creature, but also when you do a critical hit with certain weapon groups that shove a creature away. This is something that I'm guessing many people house ruled anyway, it just made sense. Here's another feat with a change, Sudden Leap. This is the one that lets you strike a creature in the middle of a leap, high jump, or long jump. Well, before, if you also had Felling Strike, which lets you knock down a flying creature to the ground, you had to spend an additional action to use that special knockdown action. Now it doesn't cost you any extra actions. I also have to say, I don't like that this feat exists, because it implies that you need this feat if you want to make an attack in the middle of a leap, high jump, or long jump. And I've had players come up with this idea themselves and want to have a cool cinematic moment, and there's a logic to being able to do it. I have allowed them to do it, but I'm not exactly sure what is the best way to adjudicate it. Maybe having it cost 3 actions or do it at a significant penalty. I don't know, but I don't like saying no. And I don't like that this exists without any guidance on how to adjudicate it in the absence of this feat. Another change to a feat is Disarming Twist. This is similar to Sleek Reposition, where it's a press action, you make a strike, and as a bonus, if you connect, you get to do an athletics skill action. In this case, it's Disarm, and it's our new sexy Disarm. Now, this existed before, and of course, Disarm has been buffed, but we have this additional bonus where if you're in Disarming Stance, which is another feat, you get a +1 circumstance bonus to the attack roll. And remember, this is to make a regular strike, so that's a little buff. Next is a new fighter feat called Flinging Charge. Basically, sudden charge, but you throw a weapon at the creature as you run up to them. You get to strike twice, you throw that weapon, and if it connects, they are off guard to your next melee attack this turn. This actually pairs well with feats that require you have a free hand and a one-handed weapon. You can throw a weapon while you run up to a monster, basically. And remember, thrown weapons use your full strength. The level 14 feat, Determination, is the same as before, except for one change. This is the one that lets you, once a day, remove a condition, spell, or magical effect. What's changed is that they removed old language that said that if it came from a creature level 20 or higher, this would have no effect on it. Obviously frustrating for parties that get to the highest levels. Well, that restriction's gone. We get a new fighter feat called Master of Many Styles. There already is a monk feat that does the exact same thing, but this lets the fighter enter a stance as a free action at the start of their turn. So if they have 2 or more stances, they can pretty freely switch between them without any action cost. And that's it for new fighter feats and changes to feats. Not a whole lot of news here. This is the class that they did say in their streams they felt was already doing its job, and they didn't want to make many changes to it. All the changes we're seeing so far are incremental, and they've been in the direction of improving things. So thumbs up. There is one question I had, though, which I think is just an editing error. The level 2 feat Aggressive Block. This lets you shove a creature that you use your shield block against, but it triggers when you use the shield block reaction, and you only have 1 reaction per turn. So technically you cannot do Aggressive Block. And in the current core rulebook, this is a free action. And I went back to the first printing of the core rulebook, and it was a free action then. So I have no idea how this got through, and if this was an intended change, it's not a good one. Next is the Ranger. This is our Wilderness Hunter nature-themed martial class. Their most important strength mechanically is their Hunt Prey action. The first part of it is that you get bonuses to seek and track your prey, and you get to avoid the range penalty within your second range increment. You can do this outside of combat. The second benefit depends on which subclass you choose. If you're a Flurry Ranger, your multiple attack penalty is dramatically reduced. If you're an Outwit Ranger, you get a defensive bonus and get bonuses on skill checks against your prey. And if you're a Precision Ranger, the first time you hit your prey every round, you do an additional amount of precision damage. Importantly, if you take an Animal Companion with feats as a Ranger, your Animal Companion benefits from your Hunted Prey actions, has all of these benefits as well. Rangers also get a healthy heaping of skills too. At first level and every even-numbered level after, they get a Ranger class feat, and there are 61 feats to choose from. There is one sample build in the book for new players. There's another one on Archives of Nethys that they didn't have room for in this book. Okay, the changes to the Ranger and the remaster. Well, I was surprised to find these when I was doing my careful examination, comparing it with the core rulebook. 2 class features have changed. Nature's Edge, this is how it currently is in the core rulebook. It said that enemies who are in natural difficult terrain or difficult terrain caused by a snare are flat-footed to you. Well, first of all, that condition is called off guard now, but it's any difficult terrain in the game, including difficult terrain from magical sources and unnatural sources. So all of those spells that create difficult terrain now have new meaning if you have a ranger in the party and you've reached this level. It can lead to some cool combos. The 11th level class feature, Wild Stride, that let you ignore non-magical difficult terrain, has been changed to be all difficult terrain in the game, which is kind of crazy thematic-wise, but also more streamlined and simpler and stronger, and I'm sure no ranger player will be complaining. You still treat greater difficult terrain as difficult terrain, however, as before. So you've become the difficult terrain dude. Difficult terrain is terrible for your enemies and not a problem for you. For the ranger feats, the current books had the ranger in the core rulebook being a non-spellcasting class, and the Advanced Player's Guide introduced a bunch of what are called warden spells, focus spells. Focus spells are a mechanic in Pathfinder that require you to spend a focus point to cast them, and you get to recharge a focus point with 10 minutes of refocusing. So these are spells that can be cast many times over the course of a day. Well, all of these feats have been combined into the player core book. Also, instead of having a feat for every single warden spell, all of the warden spells have been grouped by tier. A single feat gives you access to these 3 warden spells, and you must have one of these spells before you take one of the higher level feats that unlock a higher tier of warden spells, and I'm going to show all of the tiers on the screen. I compared the warden spells in this book to what existed previously, and I saw no changes, with one exception, which I'll explain when it comes. Something notable is that the feats for snares for the ranger currently in the core rulebook, there are several of them, they are not here. And I'm guessing it's because it's a niche option that not a whole lot of people took. And Player Core 2 is going to have a bunch of archetypes that characters can take, and there is a snare crafter archetype. So this was also a way they could slim down this book. Player Core 1 was already getting a little fat. Okay, now to the feats. Crossbow Ace has been revised. One thing the designers said was that they wanted to make the previous version of Crossbow Ace, which seemed like a required pick for anyone who wanted to wield crossbows, to make it something more optional, meanwhile providing a more powerful crossbow that would make crossbows more appealing. We'll get to that later, but Crossbow Ace has been changed so that it doesn't give bonus damage. And it had a weird trigger as well. You had to hunt prey or load your weapon in the middle of a fight instead of coming in prepared. Well, what this does, it deals with the reloading problem that crossbows have compared to other bows. Other bows don't require an action to load, it's part of firing it. But crossbows, you need to spend an action to reload it. Well, here, right before you reload it, you get to, for free, do one of these 2 actions. Create a diversion or take cover. The first is offense themed, the other is defense themed. When you create a diversion, you get to make yourself hidden to creatures, so they become off guard to you and become easier to hit and to critically hit. Take cover increases your bonus to armor class from cover. This reminds me of all of the subclasses for gunslingers that gave you an extra action when you reloaded your gun. So it's a nice solution that Paizo has come up with to deal with reloading weapons and the fact that every action's precious in this system. However, as for the designer's goal of not making this a required pick for crossbow wielders, I don't think they succeeded on that, because having another action per turn is not something to sneeze at. The next change to a feat, mostly it's changes to feats we're about to see, and there's only one new feat. The Ranger did not have a whole lot of changes overall. Here's an example of a feat that gives you access to a whole tier of several warden spells. But the one warden spell I mentioned earlier that has kind of changed is Enlarge Companion. Before, you could only access it with an 8th level feat, and it made your animal huge. It was a 4th rank focus spell. Meanwhile, the Enlarge spell lets you make a creature huge when it is heightened to 4th rank. The Enlarge spell also lets you make something just large as a 2nd rank spell. This makes Enlarge Companion work like that. You get to access it with a level 4 feat and cast it as a 2nd rank focus spell to make it large. And when you heighten it, you have the option of making a creature huge. So it works just like the enlarged spell now, instead of being walled off to higher level. So that is a welcome change. At 4th level, you can make your cat large. Okay? The 2nd level Hunter's Aim feat, the one that lets you spend 2 actions to do a very accurate attack, has been slightly changed and slightly buffed from the previous version. Before, you could ignore the concealed condition. Now you can ignore that and any lesser cover. So you get to ignore cover provided by any other creatures that are in the way. Every +1 matters. It's also great given the fact that this costs 2 actions. Sometimes you wanted to move in order to get a clear shot. This eliminates having to do that a lot of times. Next, we jump to a 16th level feat. As I said, there were not a whole lot of changes to report, at least that I found. And this is a minor one. The 16th level feat that lets you advance your animal companion to, let's call it stage 4. There are 4 stages of awesomeness. You could only take it once, but now you can take it up to 3 times, just like the druid version of the feat. But this is available at 16th level, and we're also competing with an 18th level feat by this point that lets your animal companion benefit from your improved Hunter's Edge. So this isn't a huge change in my opinion. Next, we have a new feat called Warden's Reload. This helps you with weapons you need an action to reload. It uses a crossbow as an example, but I assume this would work with guns. Basically, when you cast a Warden spell, you can, as a free action, reload a weapon. So if you're into casting Warden spells, this lessens the pain of the action economy with reloading weapons like crossbows. The level 18 feat, Impossible Flurry, this is the one that before, when you were dual wielding, let you make 6 attacks at your maximum attack penalty. Probably something you only want to pick if you have the Flurry edge. Well, there was an upgrade to that feat, a level 20 feat, that made the first attack you made with each weapon suffer from only the first multiple attack penalty. Both of those feats have now been folded in to the level 18 feat. So if you're a Flurry Ranger and you're wielding 2 agile weapons, by this level, you get to make 6 attacks. 2 of them are at -1 and the others are at -2. So that's pretty impressive. There is one feat I found that did not make it to the player core called Targeting Shot. Now this required that other feat that let you spend 2 actions to do a particularly well-aimed shot. This seems to be kind of doing double duty with that, and it has the press trait. I don't know, it seemed kind of niche. It still remains a legal spell in Pathfinder Society organized play, however. I end with a question. There is a feat called Warden's Guidance, and I have a question about some wording that has not changed from the core rulebook. This basically helps your allies perceive your hunted prey. And it clearly is a situation where they have trouble seeing it, like it's invisible or something. But it says you can only help them if it is observed by you, which means you can actually see them if we're going to use Pathfinder's definition of observed. So it seems like it's only in some use cases, maybe if you have the See Invisibility, now called See the Unseen spell cast on you. Given that this is a level 14 feat, I don't know if the word should actually be detected by you. I don't know. I'll just put it out there, and I'm interested in seeing what people think. Okay, on to the Rogue. This is our sneaky, stabby, underhanded class, who has a lot of skills. So for people new to Pathfinder, here's a brief overview. Rogues I would actually call a near martial class. They play very much like martials, but they also have a lot of skills as part of their overall power budget. They have 8 hit points per level instead of 10. Their main class feature is Sneak Attack. When they are targeting an off-guard creature, someone who has their guard down from being prone, from being flanked, many conditions impose that condition, you do extra damage, precision damage, so long as you're using an agile or finesse attack or doing a ranged attack. Thrown weapons have to be agile or finesse. Also, during exploration mode, between encounters, if you are avoiding notice, you get to roll your stealth skill for initiative. Anyone can do that, but your special power as a rogue is that if you do so, every creature who has not acted yet in the combat is off guard to you. This also works in social situations where you might be rolling deception for initiative. As you level up, you get to add debuffs to creatures that you sneak attack against. At level 19, you get the coveted Master Strike action that lets you kill, paralyze, or knock out a foe. Meanwhile, you have a buttload of skills. You get so many skills as a rogue. In addition to the 2 you got from your background, you get stealth, you get 1 or more skills from your rogue's racket, which is the rogue subclass, and you get 7 more plus a number equal to your intelligence modifier. Additionally, while every other class gets a skill feat from their background at level 1, and then from every even numbered level after, you get a skill feat at level 1 and at every level after. Also, everyone has to wait until 3rd level and every 2 levels after that to increase their skill proficiencies up from trained to expert, eventually to master and even legendary. You, meanwhile, get to do this every single level, starting with 2nd level. So at level 20, your rogue will have 21 skill feats and can have 6 legendary skills. These are the subclasses called rackets. Rogues in Pathfinder are not necessarily agile and dexterous, sneaking through the shadows. Their key attribute does not have to be dexterity. It can be another score based on their subclass. The mastermind is the intelligence-based rogue who treats any creature they successfully recall knowledge against as off guard to them. The ruffian is our thug, our bully, who is the one exception at level 1 of a character that can use the critical specialization effects of weapons. They also get to apply their sneak attack ability to weapons that are neither agile nor finesse. So things that are based on strength and hit hard. They're proficient with medium armor, and their attribute boost can be strength instead of dexterity. I think this is a great concept that other fantasy games should explore with rogues. We have class feats like Plant Evidence and Stay Down that are really fun, that probably go well with the Ruffian. The other 2 subclasses we get are Scoundrel, the charisma-focused rogue who tricks enemies to become off guard for longer periods of time and also possibly off guard to all of the rogue's allies. And the Thief, the classic thief, who gets to add their dexterity modifier to their damage. That is not the default in Pathfinder 2e, unlike in D&D 5th edition. Normally your strength is what's added to your weapon damage. The Thief is the exception. The Rogue, as a martial, gets a 1st level class feat, and like every class gets another class feat at every even numbered level. There are 81 class feats by my count for the Rogue, and there is 1 sample build provided in the player core. There are more sample builds in Archives of Nethys. So on to the remaster changes for the Rogue. Well, first, our subclasses, a couple of them got a couple of extra things. First, the Ruffian before was able to apply sneak attack with all simple weapons. This is now a broader group, because now it's limited to simple weapons with a damage die of D8 or lower, but there's like hardly any weapons that do that. There's the heavy crossbow. But more importantly, they can do this with martial or advanced weapons that have a damage die of D6 or lower. And yes, I found out recently on the subreddit that this applies to the Gnome Flick Mace, which makes me unhappier. They also get the critical specialization effect of such a weapon at level 1. The Thief subclass got a little buff in that its ability to apply dexterity to damage to qualifying weapons now extends to qualifying unarmed attacks. And I've seen some discussion online, some scary, about archetyping into the monk archetype. It'll be interesting what people do with it. The Scoundrel, meanwhile, gets to, when they faint, they get to immediately do a step afterward as a free action. Now, to feint, you have to have melee reach to an enemy, so this is about repositioning yourself around a creature. So it's nice. You can move into flanking or provide flanking to an ally, all while doing an action that might make them off guard to you longer, and to your allies even. You get to play faster and looser with your feints. The other change we see here is the non-inclusion of the Eldritch Trickster archetype from the Advanced Player's Guide. That was the one that gave you a spellcasting archetype feat at level 1. There were a number of feats that built off of it as well. So the subclass and all of the feats that were magical themed, including 2 that were in the core rulebook that predated the Eldritch Trickster, one that gave you cantrips, another that let you do sneak attack damage with a spell, they're not included here, which tells me maybe what's going on is, first, of course, they wanted to save space for this book, but also maybe they are going to release, hey Megan, a archetype for the magical trickster theme. Maybe it's something we'll see in Player Core 2, and maybe it'll be a cooler addition that any class, including rogues or spellcasters, can take and benefit from. We'll see. That's a theory. I don't know. But with these exceptions, we get basically the feats from the core rulebook and the advanced player's guide all smooshed together in Player Core 1. So I'm finding in my investigations a lot of little changes, buffs to rogue feats, and I'm going to go through them now. First is You're Next. This is the one that in the core rulebook, when you knock someone down to 0 hit points, you get to spend a reaction to demoralize somebody. First, it has the visual trait now, whereas before it was hidden inside the text of the feat. But also, it extends to 60 feet, whereas before it was limited to 30 feet by nature of it being the demoralize action. So that's a buff. Next is a new feat called Scoundrel's Surprise. Basically, you take off your disguise in the middle of combat and go ta-da, and everyone's off guard to your next attack. Now, I don't know the value of this. It seems pretty niche to me. How often are you going to be in disguise and go ta-da? And also, I assume this is the beginning of the combat or very early in the combat, and a lot of rogues are going to be avoiding notice or rolling stealth or deception for initiative and are being sneaky that way instead. So I don't know, I guess it's some middle of the fight surprise costume change. It is pretty damn flavorful though, removing your disguise with a single action. So you gotta give it that. Well, the next feat is a changed feat with a great name, Head Stomp. Before, you would do a strike against somebody who was prone on the ground and they would be off guard until the end of your next turn, even if they stood up. Well, now they additionally become stupefied. So that's an additional effect that didn't exist before. It's a buff. Next is Poison Weapon. With a single action, you get to apply a poison. You don't even have to have it in your hand onto a weapon of yours. Well, before you would have to attack somebody with it before the end of your next turn. Now there is no time limit. It just stays on your weapon and operates under the usual rules for poisoned weapons. So that's nice to see. Now, the next one, Gang Up, I believe has changed, and I'll ask the viewers to help me here, but let's compare it to the previous one. I think it's been buffed. It said before that any enemy is flat-footed against your melee attacks so long as it's within both your reach and your allies. Meanwhile, your allies must still flank an enemy for it to be flat-footed to them. So it was a feat that only affected your attacks. Now it says, this benefits your allies as well as you, but only if they're flanking with you, not each other. It's a little strangely worded because it says they're flanking with you, and the book defines flanking as something quite different elsewhere. But it does say clearly it benefits your allies. So I think you both are ganging up against a creature, which makes sense. It's a gang. Okay, next is Sly Disarm. This is a new feat. Basically, you get to use your thievery skill to disarm a creature instead of your athletics. And we have a new buffed version of disarm, of course, but also you have the additional bonus of making them off guard against your next attack before the end of your next turn if you succeed. And of course, you have sneak attack damage. Okay, next is Delay Trap. This was buffed. This is the one that lets you put a trap on hold that someone accidentally triggered that you can reach to protect yourself and everybody. Before, it said it required you to do a check to disable the trap, and before it added 5 to the DC of the trap. Now it doesn't do that anymore. Okay, next is Inspired Stratagem. Tiny buff here. This is the one that let you, in your morning preparations, designate 4 allies, and you got to, as a reaction, let them roll an attack or skill check twice and take the better result. Once per day per ally. Well, this is almost identical, admittedly. It's now 5 allies instead of 4. Not that exciting, but a buff, it's a buff. Okay, next is Swipe Souvenir. This is a new feat, but I don't know if it's very good. First, you have to be grabbed or restrained by a creature. When you escape, you can try to steal from the creature. Now, the steal action is normally limited to items of negligible bulk, and weapons are at least light bulk. They're never negligible. The benefit is that you can do this even though the creature is in combat. But it costs 2 actions, and I think this could use a little more love. I like the idea, but it seems pretty situational, and you have to be grabbed. Okay, next is Nimble Strike. This is a new feat. This is part of a little feat tree that started with Nimble Dodge, the reaction to give yourself a +2 circumstance bonus to your armor class against an attack. That qualified you for Nimble Roll, where you get to use Nimble Dodge on reflex saves. And when you succeeded at avoiding, you got to stride 10 feet. This new feat lets you make a strike against the creature attacking you as part of your reaction. It doesn't look like you have to successfully avoid the attack either. And you can also do it during your 10 feet of movement from Nimble Roll. Okay, next is Cognitive Loophole. This was the feat that let you suppress a mental condition on you until the end of your next turn. However, before, it said you had to fail your saving throw against the effect and not critically fail against it for you to be able to use this feat. They've removed those conditions entirely. Because, yeah, you can sometimes succeed on a saving throw and still be affected by spells and other effects in this game. It's also really nice to be able to suppress a condition from a critical failure. So this is nice and probably makes sense for a level 16 feat. Next is Powerful Sneak has been changed. This was the one that let the rogue turn their precision damage from sneak attack into just regular damage, because there's enemies that are immune to precision damage, like incorporeal creatures, oozes. It also was limited to weapon attacks that the rogue made where they used their strength modifier on the attack. So you really couldn't use it with a dex-focused attack, which most rogues have. Well, this has been buffed in a number of ways. First, it just says flat out, your sneak attack damage ignores any immunity or resistance to precision damage, period. In addition, when you do the sneak action, you get to designate one creature that you are undetected to. On the next attack you make against that creature before the end of your next turn, every d6 you roll on sneak attack damage will do at least 3 points of damage. So this is a buff. Every rogue can benefit from it now, and it adds damage. So those are the new feats and changes to the feats for the rogue. There is one feat from the core rulebook and advanced player's guide we do not see here, and that is the level 4 feat battle assessment. This is the one where the rogue could use their perception to find out a damage weakness of a creature, the lowest saving throw, an immunity, a resistance. Now you can see why they did this, because of the buff and clarification that the remaster has done for the recall knowledge action, which says now explicitly that the player can ask a question like, what is their lowest saving throw? So I can see why they would remove this. However, this feat did let the rogue use perception, and rogues start as experts in perception and eventually can be legendary. And they could use this against any creature. They didn't have to have the right skill to recall knowledge about a creature. So I think this still has uses. It's still legal in Pathfinder Society organized play. Still, again, I can see why they don't include it here, to make clear that recall knowledge is now your stock, find out anything action in this game. I also want to make a comment that the rogue has a feat that is similar to the fighter's sudden leap feat, making an attack in the middle of a leap, and I don't like its existence. This is 4 levels higher, and also it seems weaker than the fighter feat. It doesn't apply to the leap action, and it doesn't let you move double your speed, unlike sudden leap. And it's higher level. I would imagine it should be the same as the sudden leap feat for the fighter. It's a higher level feat. And also it doesn't combine with the rogue's version of felling strike to strike a flying creature down to the ground either. Okay. Closing statement. So, did Paizo buff the non-fighter martials? I would say kind of. Not quite as dramatic as I originally was thinking that they would. And I think that's totally fine. I mean, I haven't had players complain who play non-fighter martial classes thinking that they are weak. To the contrary, I have had players, and I felt sometimes that the fighter is a bit strong, but given how challenging Pathfinder 2e is, I'm not complaining really about that either. But anyway, I think overall, they did give a nudge to the rogue, definitely, less so to the ranger. And it wasn't much of a nudge upward. And I think that they're pretty satisfied with their design, and players in general have been pretty happy with how martials feel in this system. And that's pretty impressive to say about a new edition. Truly, I believe, an incremental edition that the remaster is. And I've been calling it 2.1. Another thing I noticed while doing the comparisons of the feats was that there are feat trees that exist for these classes. And I think it could be more user-friendly. This does mean that a person making their character would benefit from reading ahead and seeing which feats, these level 1 feats that they are looking at, become unlocked by those feats. Because it really changes the value of some of these feats. For example, let's look at Monster Hunter, which lets you recall knowledge on a creature for free when you hunt your prey. And if you critically succeed, you get to give a +1 circumstance bonus on the next attack against it by you and each of your allies. Now, I'm not trying to say or imply that this is a weak feat. This improves your action economy, and recall knowledge has now been buffed, but I can see some players undervalue it compared to some others that say more damage, more attacks. But there's a level 10 feat, Master Monster Hunter, that lets you use nature for every recall knowledge to identify a creature in the game. By this point, you are a master in nature, and this also means that you don't have to invest skill increases into the other big skills for identifying monsters. And also, you and your allies get that accuracy bonus when you have just a regular success on the recall knowledge check. Given that every +1 matters and makes critical hits more likely, this is pretty strong, I think. I think it may have been a good thing, maybe for the future, to do what Archives of Nethys does and say which feats this qualifies you for underneath it. Now, I understand that they were fighting for every little bit of space, and maybe it's inelegant given that there may be expansions, more feats in future rulebooks that are related to these. I understand. I'm just expressing a little complaint, I guess, and maybe they did the best that could be done since people can go to Archives of Nethys. I just wanted to voice that. Also, retraining is a thing, and it's a core thing that you can do under the rules. So you're not necessarily punished and trapped if you decide later you want to change a feat you took early on. Okay, and I want to address what the designers were hoping to do with the crossbow and making it more viable in Pathfinder. Now, just to summarize what the issues are with the crossbow, you need to spend an action to reload it, unlike longbows and short bows. So they wanted to address this in a number of ways. First, the crossbow ace feat was changed. As I went over earlier, they replaced bonus damage with the ability to do an action for free while you reload. So effectively removing that action tax by letting you do something that you may think is a good idea of doing anyway. They also add a level 16 feat that let you reload for free when you cast a Warden spell. However, that comes online at level 16, which means it affects a minority of the Ranger players' experience out there. My comment on this is that these feats, it's removing an action tax that players wielding a short bow don't have to deal with. A wielder of a short bow can choose to create a diversion before firing with the short bow. Also, they just didn't have to take a feat to be able to do it. And so one of the other things that the designers did was introduce a new martial crossbow. So let's set aside the action economy question for a moment and just look at the stats and the potential damage that the weapons can do and compare those. They gave us a new crossbow, a new martial crossbow called the Arbalest. It does 1d10 damage. It has the best range increment of all the bows. And it has the Backstabber trait, which adds an additional point of damage. It adds 2 points of damage when you get to a +3 potency rune, which is a 16th level rune. They also created a new weapon group for crossbows. Now, if you have access to its critical specialization effect, you can, when you critically hit something, impose 1d8 persistent bleed damage. Compare this to the bow group, which immobilizes the creature, and they have to spend an interact action to do a DC 10 athletics check to free themselves. Now, the 1d10 will give us, on average, 1 more damage compared to the longbow and 2 more damage compared to the short bow. However, the longbow and the short bow have composite versions that have the propulsive trait, which lets you add half of your strength modifier rounded down to your damage. You cannot add your strength to a crossbow's damage. And given how generous Pathfinder is with attribute boosts, it's pretty easy to get your strength up to +2 at level 1 if you want to do decent damage with the bow. So let's do some DPR analysis, shall we? So we have a 2nd level ranger. By this level, characters can probably obtain a composite short bow or longbow now. And let's assume that they have a +1 bonus from the propulsive trait to their short bow and longbow shots. Well, we see that the arbalest does average of 5.5 damage, which is better than the short bow and equal to the longbow. Unlike with the longbow, the arbalest wielder does not have to worry about the volley trait and can be up close and personal with an enemy. Also, they have the best damage if they can make that enemy off guard, and they probably want that crossbow ace feat so that they can create a diversion while reloading. So if they're spending time to set up their attacks, they can do a good bit of damage with their most accurate attack. However, they don't perform as well on a critical hit because we don't have access to the critical specialization effect of the crossbow yet, and the short bow and longbow already have their deadly D10 trait coming online. An extra D10 is added to their critical hit damage, and so the arbalest does less damage on a crit. So what happens when they get access to the critical specialization effect, which our ranger can trigger against their hunted prey? Well, here's the breakdown. I represent the persistent bleed damage with these 3 dots and this shading to indicate that this is just the very minimum damage that they will do. Once persistent bleed is imposed, at the end of that creature's next turn, they take the damage at least 1 time, and possibly an infinite number of extra times. Well, here we see a definite damage advantage over the short bow and the longbow. However, notably, this extra damage is not front-loaded. It does not happen immediately. It's persistent bleed damage. The longbow does better here, but not a whole lot more. And if you're dealing with a tough boss creature and you can make them bleed at least twice, this is going to do more in the end. Also, I think your playstyle is going to shift, particularly against those boss creatures, if you have crossbow ace, because you will want to do everything you can to get that persistent bleed damage to start. So that means maximizing your accuracy in any way you can, such as making them off guard to you. Now, some rangers might get their strength up to +4 by 5th level, and so I have a breakdown here. But the arbalest is a clear winner if you want to get, and you have time to get, a few rounds in of persistent bleed damage. So did they fix the crossbow and make it competitive with longbows and shortbows? I think for some builds. I think it could use a little more love though. But in general, these are my conclusions. I think that if you're a flurry ranger, you definitely want to get a longbow or a shortbow and take hunted shot, which lets you make 2 attacks with a single action. This frees up your action economy to do a whole lot of things on your turn. Whereas an arbalest is good if you're a precision ranger, the one that does extra precision damage the first time you damage your hunted prey per turn. You'll also want to get crossbow ace at level 1. Your playstyle is setting up a very accurate single strike per turn, at least 1. Now, I just did a DPR analysis. I often don't like DPR analyses because I think they overplay the difference of a few points. What usually matters is how you perform in the tough battles, and you can't really just point to a number and quantify the value. If you get persistent bleed damage on those tougher solo bosses, those fights that the party is more likely to die, that has a disproportionate effect. However, you do get this benefit at the cost of losing what the other bows did on a crit of immobilizing a creature. And also, it's a delayed benefit. Sometimes it's better to kill them off instead of to give them another round to bleed. You might also want to consider taking the second level feat Hunter's Aim that lets you get an additional +2 circumstance bonus on a prepared shot. With Crossbow Ace, this means you could reload, create a diversion against a creature, and get a +2 bonus, a net change of 4 against a creature, to make that critical specialization more likely. One downside of Create a Diversion, I must say, is that when you attempt it again on the same creature, the DC increases by 4. So this, for all practical purposes, is probably a one-time benefit against a particular creature. Another thing is that, and this is generally true of precision rangers generally, if the creature is immune to precision damage, you're not a happy camper. And now, if they're immune to bleed damage, you're not going to be happy if you have a crossbow also. Also, they're two-handed weapons. Short bows and long bows are called 1+ handed, where you only need that second hand when you're actually drawing an arrow and firing with an action. Outside of that, you can use that free hand for magic items, tools, and so forth. But the crossbow is a two-handed weapon, and so you're not able to do things with the free hand. In case you're wondering, you reload it and restore your grip on this two-handed weapon with the same action you reload it with. It's all spelled out in the equipment section, but that does mean less versatility on what you can do. So I don't come up with a final verdict. I do point out, though, a number of flaws with the crossbow, but if you want pure damage, hard-hitting drama, making them hemorrhage to death, it's the weapon of choice. So that is my overview of the Marshals and the remaster. Here are my next videos on the remaster. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell if you want to get notified about the next video. Also, join my Discord, where we have a growing community of people who talk Pathfinder 2e and play Pathfinder 2e. We have a drop-in organized play system. And also, support my Patreon. You get exclusive access to videos, including the 3.5-hour video, where members of my Discord and I go over the player core and the GM core book together. And you get early access to most of my videos as well. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video. I've been Ronald, the Rules Lawyer, and I'll see you next time.